Sending media across borders is one of the most influential forms of state power, and one of the newest. More traditional forms of influence have been military, diplomatic, commercial, and cultural. Proponents call this influence information, or diplomacy, or commerce. Opponents call it propaganda. The projection of a country's interests is not always negative or hostile. Sometimes it is a statement of pride. A country's flag can be propaganda. So can its national anthem, God Save the Queen in the case of Great Britain. That country has been one of the most adept at the projection of national interest. But first, let's clarify a perpetually confusing situation. What do you call this country? Sometimes we've called it England, sometimes Great Britain, and sometimes the United Kingdom. Which is proper? Which is accurate? England is the original country, in red. Over the centuries, Wales and Scotland were incorporated into England, creating the nation of Great Britain. Add the little islands of Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man, and you have the British Islands. That is the largest landmass, but that is not the entire country. Add in Northern Ireland, and voila, you have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is the official name of the country. The rest of the island of Ireland is occupied by the independent country of Ireland. So it is confusing, yes. But colloquially, if you call it the UK, or the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, or even just England, people will have an idea what you are talking about. As in most cases, context is important. The British Broadcasting Company has a long and distinguished history. It is the largest broadcasting company in the world, in audience and sales revenue. World War I began in 1914 with armies using carrier pigeons to deliver messages from the battlefield. 4 years later, wireless radio messages were employed. It was truly a revolution in communications. After the war, in the early 1920s, there was an explosion of interest for private radio licenses on both sides of the Atlantic. The antecedent of the BBC was founded as an experimental enterprise in 1922 by a group of telecom companies, including General Electric and AT&T. After seeing how chaotic the situation was in the U.S., the British government decided to privatize its electronic media industry in 1927. From the map, you can see the size of the British. From the BBC's high-minded slogan, you can still see the implicit message that their communications are designed to advance the interests of the mother country. The BBC's nicknames indicate its reputation for caution, if not outright prudery, in its programming. Nicknames like the Beeb or Anti-Beeb. If you look at the logo design changes, you can see how painfully slow they were to innovate or change. Look at those radical logos. The BBC World Service is the largest international broadcaster on Earth, offering programming in more than 40 languages and a multiplicity of digital platforms, internet streaming, podcasting, satellite, shortwave radio, etc. For nearly 300 years, from its victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588 to the destruction of nearly one-third of its 20-something aged male population during World War I, Britain was the #1 military and economic superpower on Earth. Friday, May 10th, 1940, was one of the most momentous days in British history. Germany invaded the Low Countries, Belgium and the Netherlands, and in England, Winston Churchill was named Prime Minister. The battle lines were now drawn. Churchill was one of the people with a mind and a mouth that would not cease. He was half American. His mother, Jenny, was born in Brooklyn, and he had an early career as a war hero. After that, he was elected to Parliament while still in his 20s. Churchill's career came to a crashing halt when he was fired from his government position during World War I, barely 40 years old. He then went into political exile, giving speeches and writing articles for 20 years, warning that Britain was unprepared for renascent Germany. Here on slide 12, you can see how vulnerable Britain was to German aircraft and invasion by sea. Only 22 miles wide at its narrowest point, the English Channel was not a formidable boundary. All Britain expected an imminent German invasion. They were alone. The U.S. had not entered the war yet. These are 4 of the greatest speeches in the English language, all given within about 4 months in the spring and summer of 1940. Details on the following slides and in the clips. 3 days after Churchill became Prime Minister, he made his first appearance before Parliament. While the King James Version of the Bible and Shakespeare's writings might be considered the most beautiful examples of English prose, when Churchill spoke, the English language stood up and marched. He was 65 years old, 20 years from political exile, the last hope of his nation, when he asked Parliament for their confidence in him. Listen to the clip of Blood, Toil, Sweat, and Tears. 3 weeks later, he went before the nation again to discuss the disaster in France, the evacuation in Dunkirk Beach. In bleak but inspiring terms, he drew the situation as starkly as possible in his speech with the memorable words, "We shall never surrender." Clip and excerpt in the same location as the previous speech. Notice, too, Churchill's use of language. Short, clear words. As he often said, short words are best, old words are best of all. France has now surrendered. All eyes are on Britain for the impending German invasion. It will come by sea. But first, Hitler intends to soften up the British with constant bombing, the Battle of Britain. While the air war rages above, Churchill salutes the outmanned, outgunned Royal Air Force. Please listen to the clip and read the excerpt.